The atmospheric processors of Korath Prime hummed with the deep, resonant frequency that had become as familiar as breathing to David Kane after 8 months on the terraforming project. The massive machines stretched across the facility's central chamber like mechanical cathedrals, their crystalline cores pulsing with energy that slowly transformed the planet's atmosphere into something that could support a wider range of life. The harmonic resonance has shifted again, observed Lireleth, her melodious voice carrying easily over the machinery's background drone. The Thylorian environmental specialist stood at the main monitoring station, her pointed ears twitching slightly as she processed data that went far beyond what Kane's instruments could measure. Kane looked up from the maintenance panel where he'd been calibrating pressure sensors, noting the subtle blue patterns that flickered across Lireleth's pale skin. Among her people, such coloration indicated concentration mixed with mild concern, emotional states that Kane had learned to recognize during their months of collaboration. The instruments show everything within normal parameters, Kane replied, though he'd learned to trust Thylorian environmental intuition over human technology when the two conflicted. What are you sensing? Lireleth moved gracefully between the monitoring stations, her natural communion with planetary systems allowing her to process environmental data in ways that human science barely understood. The deep rhythms feel unsettled. As if the planet is trying to communicate something we're not hearing. The Korath Prime terraforming project represented humanity's most ambitious cooperation with the Thylorian Republic, a species whose environmental mastery had made them invaluable partners in planetary modification efforts. Where human technology excelled at rapid atmospheric transformation, Thylorian sensitivity could predict and prevent ecological disruptions that might otherwise take decades to manifest. Could it be related to the new geothermal taps we brought online last week? Kane asked, reviewing the facility's power consumption data. The underground systems drew energy from Korath Prime's volcanic core, providing the massive amounts of power needed to operate the atmospheric processors. Perhaps, Lireleth said, though her skin showed deeper blue patterns that suggested uncertainty. The planet's energy flows have been different since we accessed the deeper thermal layers. Not wrong, exactly, but changed. Kane had come to respect Lireleth's insights during their collaboration, even when they conflicted with his engineering background. Her ability to sense environmental changes had prevented 3 potential disasters, including a chemical reaction that could have poisoned the atmosphere they were working to create. The geological surveys showed stable bedrock throughout this region, Kane offered, though he was already pulling up seismic data from the past week. No major fault lines, minimal earthquake activity. Stable according to human geological analysis, Lireleth corrected gently. But planets have consciousness that extends beyond physical structure. Korath Prime is trying to tell us something about the changes we're making. The concept of planetary consciousness remained one of the more challenging aspects of human-Thylorian cooperation. Kane's scientific training demanded empirical evidence, while Thylorian environmental philosophy treated planets as living entities capable of complex communication through environmental patterns. What kind of message? Kane asked, genuinely curious despite his skepticism. Lireleth closed her eyes, extending her hands toward the nearest atmospheric processor as if feeling for invisible currents. Pressure building in places that shouldn't contain pressure. Energy flowing through channels that weren't designed for such forces. Kane frowned, consulting his tablet's geological data. The facility was built according to comprehensive planetary surveys. Every major geological feature was mapped and analyzed before construction began. Human mapping focuses on current conditions, Lireleth explained, her skin showing golden patterns that indicated patient teaching. Thylorian planetary communion reads deeper, the intentions and directions of geological processes that might not manifest for centuries. The night shift had left them alone in the facility's main chamber, though emergency staff remained on duty throughout the complex. Kane enjoyed these quiet hours when he could work without the constant bustle of day shift operations, and Lireleth's presence had become a welcome constant during the long evenings. "Show me what you're sensing," Kane said, setting aside his maintenance work to join her at the monitoring station. Lyriletha's hands moved across controls that interfaced with both human technology and Thylorian biosensors, creating displays that combined empirical data with environmental intuition. "Here," she said, indicating patterns in the atmospheric readings. "The pressure variations follow cycles that suggest deep planetary movement." Kane studied the data, his engineering background allowing him to interpret the technical aspects while trying to understand the environmental implications that Lyrilleth perceived. These fluctuations could indicate thermal expansion in the underground systems, or the planet preparing for significant geological adjustment, Lyrilleth replied, her skin showing increasingly concerned blue patterns. Before Kane could respond, the facility's seismic monitoring system activated with a sharp alarm tone. Warning lights began flashing throughout the chamber as automated systems detected vibrations that exceeded normal parameters. "That's not thermal expansion," Kane said grimly, watching as seismic readings spiked beyond anything in the facility's operational history. Lyriletha's skin shifted to deep blue-black patterns that Kane had never seen before, colors that suggested fear on a scale beyond personal concern. "The planet is screaming," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the increasing alarm sounds. The first explosion came from somewhere deep beneath the facility, a rumbling that seemed to rise from the planet's core itself. Emergency lighting activated as the main power grid fluctuated, and Kane realized that Lyriletha's environmental concerns had been far more urgent than either of them had understood. "We need to evacuate," Kane said, moving toward the emergency communication system. But as he reached for the controls, a second, larger explosion rocked the facility, and Kane saw flames beginning to spread through the ventilation systems that connected the terraforming complex to the geothermal power infrastructure below. The facility's emergency evacuation system activated with mechanical precision, but Kane realized immediately that the standard procedures hadn't anticipated a disaster of this magnitude. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as the main power grid struggled to maintain basic operations while explosions continued to rock the underground sections. "Primary evacuation routes are blocked," Kane reported, checking the facility's emergency monitoring system. Red indicators showed fires spreading through the main corridors that connected their section to the surface exits. Lyrileth stood frozen at the environmental monitoring station, her skin cycling through rapid color changes that suggested overwhelming sensory input. "The planet is in agony," she whispered, her voice strained with the effort of processing the environmental chaos around them. Kane moved to her side, noting that her breathing had become labored. "Lyrileth, we need to move. The ventilation system is drawing smoke from the fires below." "I can't shut it out," she said, pressing her hands against her temples. "The pain is too loud, too immediate. Every sensor, every connection to the planetary systems, they're all screaming at once." Kane realized that Lyriletha's environmental sensitivity, normally an asset, was becoming a liability in the current crisis. Her nervous system was being overwhelmed by the facility's environmental collapse, making it difficult for her to focus on immediate survival needs. Another explosion, closer this time, sent vibrations through the floor that made the atmospheric processors shudder in their mountings. Kane watched in growing alarm as structural supports began to show stress fractures and emergency systems struggled to contain fires that were spreading faster than suppression protocols could manage. "The chemical storage areas," Kane said, consulting the facility's emergency plans. "If the fires reach the atmospheric processing chemicals." He didn't need to finish the thought. Both of them understood that the terraforming facility contained enough reactive compounds to turn the entire complex into an inferno that would be visible from orbit. "We need to find an alternative exit route," Kane decided, moving to access the facility's construction blueprints on his maintenance tablet. "The service tunnels I use for routine maintenance, they might provide a way around the main fires." Lyrileth tried to follow but stumbled, her coordination affected by the environmental sensory overload. Kane caught her arm, noting that her skin had taken on grayish patterns that he'd never seen before. "The atmospheric contamination," she said weakly. "Thylorian respiratory systems aren't designed for this level of chemical exposure." Kane realized that time was running out faster than he'd anticipated. The toxic smoke spreading through the facility would incapacitate Lireleth long before it seriously affected him, and carrying an unconscious person through the service tunnels would be nearly impossible. "Stay close to me," Kane said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders to provide support. "I know these maintenance passages better than anyone. We can make it." They moved through the facility's main chamber as quickly as Lireleth's condition allowed, Kane's engineering knowledge guiding them toward access points that most people didn't know existed. The atmospheric processors continued to operate despite the chaos around them, their automated systems maintaining the terraforming process even as the facility that housed them burned. "The irony is almost beautiful," Lireleth murmured as they passed the massive machines. "We're trying to create life while surrounded by destruction." Kane located the maintenance access he'd been seeking. A narrow passage that led to the facility's original construction tunnels. "These were built before the current ventilation system," he explained, helping Lireleth through the access hatch. "The air should be cleaner." The tunnels were cramped and poorly lit, designed for equipment access rather than human passage. Kane had to crawl in some sections while helping Lireleth navigate passages that were clearly challenging for someone in her weakened condition. "I'm slowing you down," Lireleth said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should leave me and save yourself." "Not happening," Kane replied firmly. "We're getting out of this together, or not at all." Behind them, the sounds of continuing explosions and spreading fires created an audio backdrop of destruction that seemed to grow louder with each passing minute. Kane tried not to think about how much of the facility was probably already lost, or what the disaster would mean for the terraforming project that had consumed years of planning and cooperation. "David," Lireleth said suddenly, using his first name for the first time in their months of working together. "If we don't survive this, I need you to know something." "Save your strength," Kane said, though he could tell she was fighting to stay conscious. "Your people, humans, you're not what the Council expected when they agreed to this cooperation." Kane helped her through another narrow section, noting that her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow. What did they expect? Efficiency without empathy. Technology without wisdom. Partnership based on utility rather than genuine care. Her skin showed faint golden patterns despite her obvious distress. "But you've shown something different." The tunnel ahead branched in 3 directions, and Kane consulted his mental map of the facility's layout to choose the path most likely to lead to surface access. Behind them, the sound of structural collapse suggested that their route back was no longer viable. "The way you've worked with our environmental insights, the respect you've shown for planetary consciousness even when you didn't fully understand it, that matters more than you realize." Kane found himself moved by her words despite the desperate circumstances. "We're partners. That means listening to each other, even when the science doesn't completely align. That philosophy could change everything between our peoples," Lireleth whispered, her consciousness beginning to fade as the toxic exposure took its toll. Kane realized he would soon be carrying her unconscious form through passages that were barely wide enough for one person, driven by something deeper than professional obligation or species loyalty. Somewhere during their months of collaboration, Lireleth had become more than a colleague, she had become a friend whose survival felt as important as his own. Lireleth lost consciousness just as Kane reached what he hoped was the final junction in the maintenance tunnel system. Her unconscious form was lighter than he'd expected, but carrying someone through passages designed for equipment rather than human transit tested every limit of his physical endurance and engineering creativity. Kane had improvised a carrying system using emergency safety harnesses from the maintenance kit, distributing her weight in a way that allowed him to navigate the cramped spaces while protecting both of them from sharp edges and structural obstacles. The process was exhausting, made worse by the toxic smoke that continued to seep into even the older tunnel systems. "Almost there," he muttered, though Lireleth couldn't hear him. Speaking aloud helped him maintain focus as fatigue and smoke inhalation began to affect his own thinking. Behind them, the sounds of destruction had grown to include what sounded like entire sections of the facility collapsing. Kane tried not to think about the atmospheric processors or the years of work being consumed by the fires, his entire world had narrowed to the immediate challenge of reaching surface access before they both succumbed to environmental factors. The tunnel ahead showed a faint current of cleaner air, suggesting proximity to an exit point. Kane's maintenance work had familiarized him with every access route in the facility, but navigating by memory while carrying an unconscious person tested his knowledge in ways he'd never anticipated. Emergency lighting flickered and failed as power systems throughout the facility succumbed to fire damage. Kane continued by feel and instinct, guided by air currents and the subtle temperature changes that indicated proximity to surface connections. "Come on, Lireleth," he whispered, checking her pulse and finding it weak but steady. "Your people need to know what happened here. They need to understand that the warnings were real." Kane realized that Lireleth's survival represented more than individual life. She carried environmental data and planetary insights that could prevent similar disasters. Her testimony about the ignored warning signs might be crucial for future terraforming projects. The tunnel finally opened into what Kane recognized as an old mining access shaft, part of the original infrastructure that had been incorporated into the facility's foundation. A maintenance ladder stretched upward toward what he hoped was surface access, though the distance looked daunting when considering the need to carry Lireleth's unconscious form. Kane consulted his emergency kit, finding rope and carabiners that could be rigged into a pulley system. His engineering background proved invaluable as he improvised solutions to mechanical problems that seemed impossible under normal circumstances. "Necessity really is the mother of invention," he said to himself, testing the improvised pulley system that would allow him to haul Lireleth up the shaft while climbing himself. The ascent became an exercise in determination and creative problem-solving. Kane's human adaptability and refusal to accept impossible odds drove him to find solutions that someone with less engineering experience might never have attempted. 20 meters up the shaft, Kane's emergency radio crackled with transmissions from surface rescue teams trying to account for facility personnel. The communications revealed that the disaster's scope extended far beyond their location. Multiple terraforming installations across Korath Prime had experienced similar failures. "This is Kane, Atmospheric Systems Maintenance," he transmitted during a brief rest. "I have environmental specialist Lireleth with me. We're ascending through mining shaft 7 toward surface access." "Kane, this is emergency coordination," came the reply. "Be advised that multiple facilities have reported geothermal system failures. The planetary evacuation protocols are being considered." Kane felt the weight of the revelation settling around him. The disaster wasn't isolated to their facility, it represented a systematic failure that called into question the entire approach to terraforming Korath Prime. Lireleth predicted this, Kane transmitted. Her environmental readings showed planetary distress signals that weren't reflected in our geological surveys. "Understood. Medical teams are standing by for evacuation as soon as you reach surface access." The remaining climb tested Kane's endurance to its absolute limits, but the prospect of clean air and medical attention for Lireleth drove him beyond what he'd thought possible. His human determination and innovative problem-solving had carried them through passages that should have been impossible to navigate under emergency conditions. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably less than one, Kane saw starlight through an access grate above them. The sight of Korath Prime's night sky felt like resurrection after the underground inferno they'd escaped. Emergency crews were waiting as Kane hauled Lireleth's unconscious form through the surface access, their equipment and expertise immediately focused on treating her respiratory distress and chemical exposure. Kane collapsed beside the access point, his own lungs burning from smoke inhalation but his attention fixed on Lireleth's condition. "She needs to survive," Kane told the medical team leader. Her environmental data could prevent this from happening again. As medics worked to stabilize Lireleth's condition, Kane looked back toward the facility that had consumed months of his life. Orange flames were visible through ventilation shafts, and emergency vehicles surrounded the complex as crews fought to contain fires that threatened to spread to other installations. The terraforming project that had represented hope for interspecies cooperation was burning below ground, but Kane realized that something more important might emerge from the disaster, proof that human and Thylorian approaches to planetary development needed integration rather than parallel application. Lyriletha's insights about planetary consciousness had been vindicated by catastrophe, while Kane's determination to save her had demonstrated that human loyalty extended beyond species boundaries. The combination might represent the foundation for a new approach to terraforming that honored both technological capability and environmental wisdom. Lyrileth regained consciousness 3 hours after their escape, her first breaths of clean air accompanied by the gradual return of color to her pale skin. Kane had remained beside her medical transport throughout the treatment process, refusing evacuation for his own smoke inhalation until he knew she would survive. "David," she whispered, her voice hoarse but recognizable. The golden patterns that flickered across her skin indicated relief mixed with profound gratitude. "Right here," Kane replied, moving closer to the medical pod where Thylorian and human medical specialists had worked together to treat her chemical exposure. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been breathing fire," Lyrileth said with what might have been an attempt at humor, though her expression grew serious as memories of the disaster returned. "The facility?" Kane looked toward the still-burning installation visible in the distance. "Total loss." But the atmospheric processors were successfully isolated before the fires reached the chemical storage areas. No secondary explosions. And the other installations? 7 facilities total experienced geothermal failures. The pattern matches exactly what your environmental readings predicted. Kane paused, understanding the weight of what he was about to tell her. The Thylorian Council has ordered a complete review of all terraforming operations. Lyriletha's skin showed complex patterns that cycled through several colors before settling on deep blue mixed with gold. "My people were right to be cautious about rapid planetary modification. But they were wrong about human motivations," Kane said gently. "Your survival is going to change how the Council views our cooperation." "What do you mean?" Kane helped her sit up in the medical pod, noting that her coordination was returning to normal as the atmospheric toxins cleared from her system. "When the facility was collapsing, you said something about humans not being what the Council expected." "I remember." Lyriletha's skin showed brighter golden patterns. "You risked your life to save someone whose people have questioned every decision, challenged every assumption, insisted on environmental considerations that slowed progress." "Because those considerations were right," Kane replied. "And because partners don't abandon each other when things get difficult. That philosophy, that commitment to genuine partnership, it's not what the Council anticipated from a species known for technological efficiency and rapid resource exploitation." Kane realized that their escape from the burning facility had become something larger than individual survival. "Your people thought we saw Thylorians as useful consultants rather than true partners." "Exactly. Many Council members believed that humans would cooperate only as long as it served immediate practical interests. When cooperation became inconvenient or expensive, they expected abandonment. But instead..." Lyriletha's skin blazed with golden patterns brighter than any Kane had seen during their months of working together. "Instead, a human engineer risked his life to save a Thylorian environmental specialist whose warnings had been vindicated by disaster. Instead of saying, 'I told you so,' you chose solidarity." Kane felt the weight of her words settling around them. "What does that mean for future cooperation?" "Everything," Lyrileth whispered, her voice carrying implications that extended far beyond their personal situation. "You've changed my people's fate, human." Kane frowned, not understanding the full significance of her statement. "How?" The Council was preparing to withdraw from all terraforming partnerships. The geothermal failures would have been seen as proof that human technological approaches are fundamentally incompatible with planetary consciousness. My death in a human facility would have provided the justification they needed. And now? Now they have evidence that humans possess qualities beyond technological capability. Loyalty that transcends species boundaries. Willingness to sacrifice for others. Recognition that partnership means shared risk, not just shared benefit. Kane studied her alien features, noting the profound hope that had replaced the environmental distress he'd observed during the disaster. "You think that will be enough to change their minds?" I think your actions have demonstrated that true cooperation is possible between our species. Not just tactical alliance, but genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. As dawn broke over Korath Prime, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that complemented the distant glow of the still-burning facility, Kane reflected on the unexpected turns that had brought them to this moment. The terraforming project that had consumed months of effort was destroyed, but something more valuable had emerged from the disaster. The Council will want to hear your testimony, Lireleth continued, her strength returning as clean air and medical treatment continued their work. But they'll also want to understand why a human chose personal risk over personal safety to save someone whose people had questioned his work. What will you tell them? That I found something in human nature that our cultural analysis had missed. Compassion that extends beyond immediate utility. Loyalty that isn't conditional on convenience. Her skin showed patterns Kane had never seen before, colors that suggested joy mixed with profound transformation. I'll tell them that the future of terraforming depends not on choosing between human technology and Thylorian environmental wisdom, but on true integration of both approaches. Kane looked toward the horizon where other terraforming facilities were visible as points of light against the dawn sky. And if they believe you, then the disaster that destroyed one facility becomes the foundation for rebuilding everything better. Terraforming projects that honor both technological capability and planetary consciousness. Partnership that recognizes the value of different perspectives rather than merely tolerating them. As medical teams prepared to transport them to the main evacuation center, Kane realized that his desperate escape through burning tunnels had accomplished something he never could have planned. Individual acts of courage and loyalty had bridged the gap between species, proving that genuine cooperation was possible even in the most desperate circumstances. Your people's fate? Kane asked, remembering her words from the night before. Changed from cautious isolation to genuine partnership, Lireleth replied, her skin showing the golden patterns that indicated hope and joy among her people. Because sometimes it takes a fire to burn away the barriers that prevent us from seeing what's really possible. Kane watched the sunrise paint Korath Prime's sky in colors that seemed to promise new beginnings, understanding that their survival had become the foundation for something larger than either of them had imagined. The flames that had threatened to destroy everything had instead forged a bond between species that could reshape the future of human Thylorian cooperation among the stars.